Well, first off, the purpose of this lesson is to give you tips that can help you understand how to do your work easier with far less stress and help you align your chapter 2 as early as you can so that therefore when you do more work on it later, you'll really be more efficient and effective in writing the chapter. I'm going to give you a sound approach, the same approach I use with my doctoral students, my mentees that I've worked with for over 13 years. It's the same approach that I use in my own work as a researcher when I'm having to write reports, particularly those research reports that I have to do for clients. I want to emphasize the importance of critical thinking in this lesson. That's the reason why I'm including Benjamin Bloom's taxonomy. The importance of critical thinking in this lesson goes with every other lesson from this chapter, because in chapter 2, that's really what you're doing. You're applying your critical thinking skills as you go through all the references to write your story. It's not just a matter of reviewing one article or one book and then creating some sort of flowing content. It's more about having read and reviewed all the content. If you call it, you have read or heard the voices of others, and then what you're doing is you're writing your own voice, if you will, that suggests that you have heard and read the voices of others. So it's really your story, and the way you do that is through, yes, partly doing some reviews of some of the sources, but then it's going into doing a little bit of comparison and contrasting, and then increasing levels of depth as you start to look at divergent views and synthesize the many items down into what you believe is your evaluation and analysis of all those many items. And that's the essence of critical thinking skills, is to be able to provide your insights in a manner that's going to be coherent and bring great credit upon yourself. And then the other purpose of this lesson is to relate Bloom's taxonomy. I'm a firm believer if you have an understanding of how to create your work, it's going to be easier for you to actually get to work and make that come to be. It's the same with creating an outline. Once you create an outline, then it's easier just to start filling in the outline, and if you have to change the outline, it's a matter of just minor adjustments along the way, not trying to look at a whole chapter that's over 30 pages long. You can work with one section at a time, and that's one of the things that I talk about with all my students, and is an inherent part of what I do, which I call incremental gains. Incremental gains are where we make small steps of progress that collectively add up over time. And by doing that, even in this program, that you're going to be able to make progress a little bit at a time in a confident manner that's going to allow you to see your work building. And as you do that, that's going to help increase your desire to want to do better and do more work. Some of the tips and strategies I'll share with you is, first, as I just was talking about, creating a chapter outline. Do that with just the headings and the subheadings. Don't get involved with putting any content in there. Just do a chapter outline. Once you see the major headings and subheadings, then it's easier, as I mentioned earlier, start filling them in. For example, if you're doing a quantitative study, you might look at your headings, the major headings, to be your dependent variable and your independent variables. And then going into another major heading of relationships and interrelationships of all the content. I shared that insight when I gave ideas in another lesson about how to create chapter 2 for a quantitative study. In the other lesson that I did about a qualitative study, I gave insights about how you might create an outline that has perhaps the topics of what you're going to do with your qualitative case study. If perhaps you're doing a phenomenological study, what is it that one central area of focus that you're looking at, and what are perhaps the historical information that relates to it, the trends? Perhaps what are the themes that relate to qualitative analysis that you're going to be doing? These themes or these topics, these subjects, or perhaps even critical points will then help you create your headings. Once you have your major headings, then it's easier to break down into subheadings. I always encourage my mentees is that with each heading, have at least 3 subheadings. Now this may not always be the case, but it's a good guide. If you can come up with 3 subheadings, then you start to see structure coming into play. And you can also then look at balance. If all of a sudden you have 5 subheadings in one section and only 2 in another, then you have a decision. Do you balance your chapter out by either putting less in one area, more in another, or is it just fine as it is? There's nothing to say it has to be balanced, but you'll find the better you can balance your work, the better it's going to be overall. Identify related articles to topics. Once you get that heading and those subheadings put together in that outline, all of a sudden it's going to be like a filter for you. You're going to be able to then look at the articles and books perhaps that you're reading, and you're going to decide whether they fit or not. You may have some that are questionable, and that's okay. Then you put them in the questionable file. But what you want to be able to do is look at all the articles and start to look and say, do they fit the headings or the subheadings, the content that you want to write about? If it does, then include them. If not, then don't worry about it. You may keep them and say, well, maybe I'll put this on a pile later because it might be handy. Nothing wrong with that. Remember, you may have to look at 700-800 articles and books total to get maybe 10% of those that you're going to use. It's not uncommon that somebody's going to ideally look at over 1,000 different references, any kinds of sources such as articles and books and research reports, and only use 10% of those. But it's not like you're going to be doing all these reviews at once. Many of you have been doing your reviews of the literature for years, and you just don't realize it. But you have been. In many cases, all the work that you've been doing in your classes to write assignments have been considered literature that you've been reviewing, and now it's time to decide whether any of those will actually fit your dissertation or not. In many cases, they will. And then another tip and strategy is to actually apply Bloom's taxonomy that I'm going to show you here. And that will allow you to display critical thinking skills at its highest level and in a manner that I believe will bring great credit upon you and your work. The reason I go through Bloom's taxonomy is because once I learned it years ago, I realized the value in it. And as soon as I learned the value in it, I bought the book on cognitive and affective domains on how he wrote his taxonomies, and they've been helpful to me ever since. I would encourage you also to do the same. At the end of this lesson, I'll give a couple of references, and one of them is his book on cognitive theory. You may be able then to take that information and decide maybe you want to buy that book yourself. Another tip and strategy that I believe is important, that I like to recommend, is I tell my mentees to write first and then add the references in. Now, that's nothing to say that you can't write along with what you're reading and then adding your references in, but I have found that in many cases, the value of Chapter 2 comes from the person who writes the content first, gets their ideas and insights out, puts them together in a coherent manner, starts to add some references in there that are valid and applicable, and then they continue on writing to the next section. Again, I encourage one section at a time, one heading at a time. And this way you build up that chapter little by little, and it's the writer's voice. It's your voice that comes out. The idea here is not for you to string together a bunch of quotes and paraphrases. I've seen that happen all too often in first-year doctoral education programs where some faculty members require you to do a citation for every sentence you write. Well, I'm not here to tell you that's wrong. I'm just telling you that doesn't work well come literature review time when you're working on your dissertation and you have to write to the review of your literature that you sought out. In year one of your program, they're teaching you to go to the sources and use them. They're teaching you, in many cases, to help you eliminate your personal opinions from your writing. We want your personal experiences and lived experiences and your critical thinking skills to be reflected in your work in your dissertation, but that doesn't mean stringing together quotes and paraphrases. I'll give more insights on that later as we go through this and other lessons. A tip is you just have to realize that you're going to draft your work, you're going to revise it, you're going to add to it, you're going to review it, and then it's going to be repeated many, many times. It's going to be repeated by you, it's going to be repeated by your dissertation chair, by your committee members, by the university. I encourage you just to keep in mind that this is a work in progress until the day you publish your dissertation. It's not uncommon, even after you get your proposal approved, that you will be revising Chapter 2 until that dissertation is approved. I hear all too often students believe that once their proposal is done, they don't have to do anything more in Chapter 2. That is not the case. That is not sound advice. I don't know anybody who promotes that, and if they do, well, I'd encourage you to think differently, because until your work is published, there's always information coming out. If you're on a good topic, something that people care about, there's going to be publications coming out, there's going to be articles about it. So while you may have finished your proposal maybe even a year ago or 2 years ago, and you're still finalizing your dissertation, you still need to go back in and review your literature. I have seen too many dissertations denied, not approved, at the university level because the literature was not up to date. I understand that when you got your proposal approved, your literature may have been up to date, but time has passed. And in some cases, critical factors and critical points have happened along the way. And so therefore, you got to make sure your work is up to date. And just have the mindset that you're going to be revising this work over and over and over. This is what's going to help make you that expert. You have to remember, when you get your dissertation done, you are going to be perceived as an expert by others. You should believe that you're an expert already, but if you don't believe it, it's hard for other people to. But I can guarantee you, once you get done with your dissertation and it's approved, others will view you as an expert in your area. Again, it's a work in progress until the dissertation is approved. I put this in here yet again because I want to be able to drive this point home. You have to just keep on spending time looking at the literature. Even if you only have 10 or 15 minutes sometimes and you can devote it to your dissertation, you know what? Go online. Look in ProQuest. Look in EBSCOhost. Look at any search engine. Put one of your topics in there. Maybe it's your dependent variable, independent variable, or the content or the concepts you're studying and writing about, and see what's new, if anything. There's many different resources such as Google Scholar. You can put in your topics. It will automatically let you know when there's new information being published on your topics. That's probably the best way to do that. Just let the systems work for you. I want to go into Bloom's taxonomy now. And Bloom's taxonomy, its lowest level that Benjamin Bloom wrote about, and there's 6 different levels. I'm going to walk you through those levels. And I'm going to share insights with you. And the lowest level is knowledge. And what you're going to find here is within Bloom's taxonomy is the structure of how universities and colleges create curriculum. For example, I'll share insights with you on how the lower levels of Bloom's taxonomy are used perhaps at the college and lower levels, perhaps 100 and 200 levels of universities, maybe even all the way up to the 400 level of bachelor's degrees. I'll show you how in the mid-range area we're going to find more of the information relates to master's degrees on the objectives and how we satisfy objectives at the master's degree. And then at the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy, where more advanced critical thinking skills are applied, we're going to see how the objectives were created based on Bloom's taxonomy at the doctorate level. And the same concepts come into play as you write your work. You're going to be moving your review of the literature from a very basic to a very advanced stage of knowledge, information that you're transferring to others. At the lowest level, think about it this way. When you first got your first job, maybe you worked in a call center and you were on the phone answering the calls and trying to get people's awareness and what they needed to know about or transfer them to somebody else. Or perhaps you're a nurse, and when you first got out of school, you went to work at the bedside, you were being trained, you did other activities as well besides being at the bedside, and they were the first things that you were doing. You had some basic knowledge of some training that you went to, and you were sitting there or standing, working, and you were applying that basic knowledge, but also learning how to apply that knowledge. Here you were able to perhaps have some suggestion of your previously learned information. If you went to school for nursing, they gave you some ideas on how to actually take blood, how to take a pulse, how to do different things of those types of process nature. Now you're doing it in the workplace, and you're doing it on real people, and you're trying to take what you learn and figure out now how do you put that needle into somebody's arm and draw blood the correct way without hurting them and without puncturing a vein. So what you're able to do is suggest. You may not even be able to do it yet. You may just have the knowledge, and now you're starting to get some on-the-job experiences. Perhaps in some ways, what you're able to do is take what you know and arrange your education and describe and relate to what you read and learned in school. So you're able to relate what you learned in school to drawing the blood for the first couple weeks of your job as a nurse when you're actually dealing with people. You're able to describe it because you're now doing it, and you're starting to build up some level of frontline expertise at its lowest level. And this is what we talk about in undergraduate work. Many of the objectives that are in undergraduate work when we're asking students to write their assignments are based on these same kinds of concepts, these same kinds of cognitive skills to read information and arrange it. For example, there's 5 fundamental steps in management. People should be able to understand what those are and arrange them in the correct order. able to describe how to draw blood if you're a nurse, and be able to relate some problems perhaps that what happens if you draw it the wrong way. So we see this at the lowest level. And this is maybe often what happens in your doctoral education early on, when we give you 3 or 4 articles and we just ask you to review them. All you're doing perhaps is describing what you read or relating to what you read. And maybe we have to actually have you arrange them in priority order or of some semblance of how things happened over time, if you will, maybe a historical point of view. The next level in Bloom's taxonomy, moving up into higher level order, is really based now on comprehension. You understand the facts. You have read the materials. You've been in the classroom. Now you're doing it. Now you're doing the on-job training. This on-the-job training is providing you a skill set. Now you're starting to see where theory meets practice, that maybe not everything they told you is actually the way it works in the workplace. Perhaps maybe now you have spent some time in a call center, and what you were trained on initially in the on-the-job training isn't exactly the same thing when people are screaming at you on the phone. And so therefore you're starting to understand the facts that it's more than just answering the phone and giving customer service. Sometimes you have to actually be helpful. You have to be courteous. Even though when people are screaming at you, you have to remain calm. So you're understanding the facts that sometimes people are calling in, they're going to be irate because why they're calling in means whatever they have perhaps is not working, and they're talking to you because they need your help. In such a situation here, to reflect comprehension, we start to see even in the coursework at a college where you're starting to show some comprehension. Now you're able to distinguish between perhaps theory and practice. You're able to explain what's going on. You're able to explain how to improve a process. You're able to explain how to train others. You're able to take information and not only summarize it, but paraphrase it back in a coherent manner that shows that you have now some personal expertise, and you're also able to regurgitate it, if you will, or repeat it in a manner that shows you have comprehension. So now perhaps maybe even in the workplace at the call center level, maybe you're ready for an advancement now. Maybe you've been there for a year or so and you're ready for an advancement to be a call center supervisor, because now you have so much experience. You can explain what's happening, you can summarize, and you can distinguish between what's good and not good customer service. This level is still undergraduate work. It's still found at the college level. It's not graduate level work yet, because this is still a point where it's that workforce placement, if you will, that shows it's more than the basic knowledge. It's got a year or two of perhaps experience, and then the assignments, you're basically doing these action verbs here of explain, summarize, paraphrase, and distinguish between information. Now the third area, or the third of the 6 areas in Bloom's taxonomy, is the application stage. Here you're actually able to apply the knowledge to actual situations. Now maybe you have some frontline experiences. Maybe you're doing a little supervising or teaching experience to the new employees, but now you're ready to be that full-fledged call center supervisor, now in charge of maybe 10 people or 20 people or a shift. You're now able to apply that knowledge to actual situations. You've not only been in the call center for a period of time now, you've also given some OJT to a couple different people who are newer than you, who came in after you did, and now you're actually able to apply this in a larger scale. Maybe you're learning how to be a supervisor now, and you're ready to go and work with 5 or 10 people who are going to be subordinates of yours, and you're going to be able to apply this knowledge to them and help them be even better than you were. Here, you're going to be able to do these types of work situations, if you will. You're going to be able to illustrate, interpret, and relate. You're going to be able to illustrate for others, interpret from your lived experiences, and relate it to other people as they're going through and asking questions. Now we start to see that we're merging into an area which is starting to be more so master level work, and it's really about how it was or how it is in the workplace. In some ways, you're starting to maximize the current business models. It's perhaps how nurses are actually working at the bedside. What's the best way to do that as compared to what they learned in school and what they learned when they first came on the job. Now you're able to interpret what's going on and relate not only theory to practice, but your years of experience as well. You're able to tell people how it is in the workplace, or perhaps how it was at a certain time, and draw conclusions to it perhaps even. Here we're starting to see, as I mentioned, the introduction of master's level work. When you are in an executive MBA program or master's in nursing program, or you're being educated in the field of education for a master's degree, you're starting to see where you're able to move from being a teacher, if you will, in the education situation. Now perhaps you may even be on your way to becoming a vice principal, or perhaps some other role in a leadership position within the superintendent organization at the district level. The next area is analysis. Here, you're able to reduce complex concepts into similar parts. This is what you're going to be doing when you find all the different articles that you have on a specific topic. Let's say it's for the dependent variable. You're going to take all the different articles, you're going to analyze them, and you're going to be able to reduce the concepts to simple parts for other people to read and get some ideas based on how you read it and what you believe it to be based on your lived experiences and the philosophies that you carry. Here, you're going to be able to suggest evidence support generalizations. If you read 5 articles and they're all research-based and they're about the same topic, perhaps employee performance, you're going to be able to then take all that information and make some generalizations about it that says perhaps all the articles had something to do with the topic of happy employees are more engaged employees. Happy employees communicate more. The more employees communicate, the more effective they are in the workplace, the more open they are, the more they're willing to talk with one another to be creative and innovative. So you may be able to suggest evidence that you see that maybe others can't see themselves because they don't have your same experiences. And here, the type of work that one would be doing is being able to differentiate, subdivide, and infer. Remember, when you get into chapter 5, later you're going to make some recommendations and conclusions. You're going to infer what did the data mean through your analysis. You may actually have to differentiate between different types of data or interview data that was given to you based on what the story is once you put all your data together, whether it be a statistical analysis or whether it be an analysis of themes that are generated through qualitative work, but you may have to differentiate and subdivide the information to enable you to infer information from that. Now, synthesizing in Bloom's taxonomy is where you have compiled component ideas into a whole new purpose or alternative solutions. Think about it this way. If I gave you 30 different articles and I says, now read all 30 articles and then tell me about them. Now, what you're going to do is read all 30 of them and then give a synopsis about that. And you're going to be able to compile the component ideas that were within them. You're going to find some areas that are similar, some that are divergent. You're going to find some articles are going to talk about one thing, and that one article, no other author will write about them. Those aren't necessarily what we're looking for. We'd be looking for what are the common themes in those 30 articles. And really, that's what you're doing in your dissertation when you review the literature. You may have 100 different articles that you're then breaking it down to smaller components, or that you're taking these ideas and creating something new from it. We see at the doctoral level in education where you're no longer looking at solving the complex problems of today, but you're looking to the future to solve the new ones before they arrive. And this is forward thinking. This is where you can start to take what you inferred from one piece or one part of your work and go into something completely different that's bigger and maybe offer alternative solutions before the problem even arises. Here you're going to be able to take all those articles. Again, if it was 30 or if it's 100, you're going to be able to combine them, you're going to rearrange them, and you're going to summarize them all. It's not just about doing one article review. It's about summarizing the many articles or sources, whatever you may be using, whether it includes books or different types of reports, other than just general peer-reviewed journal articles. Your view of the many sources. Just think of it that way. If you looked at all the information that one puts into their chapter 2, all you're doing is distilling it down to be able to combine all the information for somebody to have an easy understanding of it, rearrange it in some sort of semblance of order or something that makes sense as far as a theme, maybe it's historical view, or whatever it is related to that topic or point that you're addressing, and then you're going to summarize it all. Now, the final phase is evaluation. Evaluation is the highest level of Bloom's taxonomy, where now you're going to suggest new insights based on the content and lived experiences. Now, what you may actually be doing here is suggesting the gap in the literature, because you synthesized your work. You started to look at all the information, summarize, and say that there's the area that's not being addressed well enough, and perhaps that's the area that's related to your problem statement that you articulate in Chapter 1. Now, this would be ideal, and oftentimes this happens. When you create a really good Chapter 2 that's thorough and robust, then we start to see where there are some gaps in the literature, or some inconsistencies at least, that need to be addressed. And now this is where we start to see where Chapter 2 helps support the problem statement development in Chapter 1. And we start to see more than ever before alignments coming into play when we see Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 coming together. Here, you're not only able to analyze and summarize, now you're able to make some conclusions. You're going to be able to defend your work in an oral dissertation, and you're going to be able to justify your work. You'll be able to justify what you did based on your objective points of view by bringing the different sources together and letting the reader gain a sense of those areas that perhaps those gaps, or perhaps the area that needs more studying. And this is really the essence of Chapter 2. At the highest levels of critical thinking, this is what you're going to do. You're going to take everything you've learned through the reading of the literature, have all that information available to substantiate your ideas based on what you read. And that's exactly what we're looking for. Now, we're not looking just about your opinions. Now, some of this is going to certainly be grounded in your lived experiences and your philosophies that you hold to be true. That's fine. That's expected. We won't get your own individual story out of you otherwise. But you're going to conclude, defend, and justify based on what the data is, not based on what you believe it to be. This is definitely doctoral level work and what we expect in your Chapter 2. The more work that you can provide in Chapter 2 that shows that you're able to conclude, defend, and justify what you've read and what that literature suggests, the greater value you're going to include in your Chapter 2. Now, some other insights and ideas to consider as you go through writing your chapter and how you put sources and information together is, first off, you have to write from the expert's point of view. You have to believe you are the expert. I believe you're the expert. I believe every one of my dissertation mentees is the expert in what he or she is writing about. I certainly am not. How can I be? They are. You have to look at this, that you're writing from the expert's point of view. And when you think that way, you'll start writing more that way. You have to remember that your Chapter 2 is not being designed for you. It's not being designed for your dissertation committee. It's not being even designed for a university. These are just people that prove it and help you make it better. You're writing this chapter for people 3, 5, 10 years from now, maybe even 100 years from now, who are going to read your work, and they are going to look to you as an expert. So therefore, you have to remember, you're writing as an expert, and the expertise that you have has to flow, and it should be flowing from those higher levels of critical thinking, as I've just been sharing with you. Connect the references, not write to them. That's why I encourage people to write first and add the references in later. I see too many students early on, particularly when they're starting to write Chapter 2, writing like they do assignments, and they're stringing those quotes and paraphrases together. They get a couple different sources, they put them in some sort of order of time, perhaps, or who they believe to be the best or smartest or the most articulate, and they start writing to the references that this author said this author said that. That's not what we're looking for. Yes, you do have to include that type of information, but write to the content, write to the topics, to the objectives, and then support your work with references. If you see that you're writing to your references and you get a reference and you say, well, gee, now I got to create a paragraph around this reference, that's wrong. And I encourage you not to do that. I encourage you to think about, let me write the paragraph, and then let me go find the references that I have that support it. Or on my next trip to the library, I'll ask the librarian if I can find some other information that I don't already have. Find that aha. That aha could be that gap in the literature that I mentioned, that nobody's seen, or that's the power of what you're writing about. The idea being this aha could be a critical factor, could be a change in philosophy, a change in thinking where the body of knowledge perhaps didn't catch it or doesn't have enough information about it. If you write a really good chapter 2, you should have some sort of aha moment that you're relating to, which gives the reader that one thing that they walk away with, says, you know what, I did not know that. If at the end, when you write chapter 2, you can't walk away with it and say, you know, I did not know that before I started writing it, then I encourage you to keep writing because you're not done. That aha moment has to come for you, and you should know when it happens. When I did my proposal work and I was looking at the literature, I had an aha moment because there were people using the fitness center and still were not becoming more healthy. I didn't even consider that possibility. How could somebody go to a fitness center and be in worse health after they've used it for a period of time? My literature review helped me to learn. That was one of my aha moments, and it also helped me to learn that people who do that, sometimes it's a natural limitation that people who use a fitness center won't admit that they're getting to be in worse shape because they have problems relating to themselves in such a manner. So aha moments are all over the place. We just have to look for them. And when you find them, then write them and make sure they're clear in your literature. Review published research articles and dissertations. The reason I include this is I know it's nothing new. Many of you have been looking at ProQuest dissertations and reading some of those reports that are there. You've been looking at articles since you've been in undergraduate programs. But review published research articles and dissertations, not so much because of what's in it, not because of the actual content, but how people wrote. Look at how their content flows. Again, I encourage you, whatever university you're in right now, go to ProQuest dissertations. Download a couple dissertations that have been published recently, and particularly in your research method and design, and read chapter 2. It doesn't even have to be on the topic that you're writing about. Just pick a recent one, because the reason for picking a recent one is you'll see what's been approved, and you'll be able to then emulate perhaps the writing style. And just read those. Read them for your pleasure. And I understand that sometimes doing homework is not necessarily reading for pleasure, but don't even take a pen in your hand. Just read the chapter. Yes, I understand that some of them are 30 or 40 or 50 pages long. It's okay. It's time well spent. You will be learning. If it takes you an hour or two, you know what? Include that into your study time. If you're traveling to and from work on a train or a plane, great place to do that. You can also turn it into an audio as a PDF and listen to it if you want to. But go in and read particularly chapter 2 and just gain a sense for how they wrote. And then when you're done reading that chapter, then make some notes to yourself. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? Did the content flow well together? Did you get a point for what the author was trying to relate to you? If it was quantitative, did you get a full sense of the dependent, independent variables and the relationships and interrelationships? If not, then that's good to know, because then you can overcome that when you do your own work. And you can find the strengths in there and make sure that they're also incorporated into your own work. Completed. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this lesson.